Hello, thank you for watching. This is Jackson Bleacher's College Football Best Bets for Week 10. It's November 1st, so this is the last month of the regular season of college football. And while there will still be postseason games played until early January, it's sad to see the on-campus part coming down to the last 3 or 4 weeks. But we do have a good slate of games this weekend all over the country, but I think the SEC will steal the spotlight, because this Saturday will go a really long way in determining who will end up in Atlanta for the SEC championship game. In the West, you got Alabama at LSU, and that's definitely the big headliner game. And while the Tide could just about seal the SEC West with a win, the Georgia at Kentucky game will definitely decide who gets the SEC East crown. Last week wasn't our best week of the season. We were 1-2 last week, and that brought us to 19-12-1 overall. So we'll bounce back with a 3-0 week this week. The first game is Syracuse minus 4.5 at Wake Forest. What Dino Babers has been able to do with the Syracuse football program has been nothing short of amazing. The Orange was that football program was a joke when he took over, and now in year 3, they're 6-2, with one of those losses coming by only 4 points at Clemson, who's the number 2 team in the nation. That other loss was a game they should have never lost. That came in overtime at Pitt. But to be fair to them, that game was delayed by lightning for a while. Eric Dungey, the Syracuse quarterback, and the rest of that offense, they know how to light up the scoreboard. Their lowest scoring game of the season came at Clemson, and they only managed to put up 23 points on the number 2 Tigers. But I mean, if that's your lowest point output of the year, and it was at number 2, and you're still putting up 23, it's pretty good. And then last week, Syracuse lit up NC State for 51 points. And if you remember, it was only 2 weeks ago that the Wolfpack were undefeated and in the hunt for a playoff spot. And they've fallen off fast. You could argue that Syracuse hasn't really beaten an upper-tier team yet this season. And while that could be true, it doesn't really matter in terms of picking against the spread, because they're not facing an upper-tier team this week. You could say they just picked on bad teams all season, but guess what? The team they're playing this week is a bad team. Wake Forest is just not good, and there's no way around it. And I know they beat the doors off of Louisville last week on the road, but the Cardinals are terrible too. The Demon Deacons have played 2 good teams this year, Notre Dame and Clemson, and they were completely embarrassed on their home field in both of those games. Notre Dame took them down 56-27, and Clemson beat Wake 66-3. So, I mean, you could make the argument that Boston College is a good team, but guess what? They did lose to Boston College at home too, and that was on a Thursday. So, the home team on a short week always has a little bit more of advantage than normal. They lost to BC as the home team on a Thursday, and if I'm remembering right, that was a little bit of an early start because of the hurricane, so even more of an advantage to Wake Forest there, and they still couldn't win. But unless Syracuse just completely overlooks Wake Forest, they should win the game by 10 plus. Syracuse minus 4.5 is stealing money. So then second game, got Georgia as a 10-point favorite over Kentucky. Kentucky's game at Missouri last week was greatly overshadowed by Florida and Georgia. And in case you missed the game, they looked terrible. The Cats were down 14-3 in the fourth quarter to a very average Missouri team, and they struggled to pass the ball all game, just like they have all season. With the benefit of a pretty bad call, Kentucky scored a walk-off touchdown on an untimed down to sink the Tigers. And like the last couple of seasons under Mark Stoops, the Wildcats have gotten off to a really good start, but the difference in this year's Kentucky team and the last couple is that they've been able to keep winning all the way through October. Even with the success this season, though, there have been plenty of signs of the magic beginning to run out, and I think it completely runs out this week. Kentucky dropped its first game of the season a few weeks ago in College Station, and while there ain't nothing wrong with losing to Texas A&M on the road in overtime, the last 2 weeks should be cause for alarm in Big Blue Nation. Because we already mentioned the ugly win in Columbia last week, but what about the week before? They had to squeak out a 14-7 home win over Vanderbilt. And then you look at Georgia, who with the exception of the trip to Baton Rouge has looked unbeatable all season. The Dogs have run through everybody else on their schedule, and the Florida game was really the only one that's been remotely close. So they can beat you through the air, they can beat you on the ground, and they can beat you on defense. LSU and Missouri were the only 2 teams that have even managed to put up 30 on Georgia, and this game will be played in Lexington, and it's probably the biggest home game in Kentucky football history. The crowd will be nuts, and the Cats will be all juiced up. They're finally getting the national spotlight with the CBS game, but they're going to get embarrassed. It's really simple. Kentucky is not very good. Georgia is good. And this game is for all the marbles. It's for the right to get murdered by Alabama in the SEC championship game. Georgia should have this one wrapped up by halftime and will cover the 10 points easy. So then, if you've been watching this for at all, really, we've been doing it all year. We've been picking 3 games. This week is a little bit different. Usually, I have my 3 picks by Thursday morning and then keep an eye on a couple for the rest of the week. But I haven't done that yet this week. I've only locked in those first 2. But there are a bunch of them, 4 of them actually, that I'm keeping my eye on. And those 4 are South Carolina, Ole Miss. That's a pick'em game. Texas A&M and Auburn. Auburn's a 4-point favorite in that game. Alabama is a 14.5-point favorite at LSU. And Washington State is a 10.5-point favorite at home against Cal. And we'll kind of go game by game here. At the moment, I'm leaning towards South Carolina in a pick'em game at Ole Miss, but that's far from a lock. Ole Miss just can't stop anybody. South Carolina doesn't have the best offense, but they do have a pretty decent defense. I just think South Carolina is a slightly better team. I have not decided either way. I'm going to watch that line, but if I had to pick right now, South Carolina, I would pick South Carolina in the pick'em. The second game on that list, I'm very tempted to take Texas A&M as a 4-point underdog at Auburn, but the Aggies just had a bad loss in Starkville last Saturday night, and Auburn's coming off a bounce-back win at Ole Miss and a bye week, so I'm just not sure about it yet. That one's one I'm definitely going to keep watching. I think Alabama, they're 14.5-point favorite at LSU, which looks a little high, but I think they beat LSU by 17+. But it is a little worrisome to lay more than 2 touchdowns at LSU at night, especially after watching what the Tigers did to Georgia a couple of weeks ago. If that line does ever drop to Alabama minus 13.5 or better, I would lock it in immediately. But as long as it's over 2 touchdowns, I'm going to have to keep thinking about it. And then finally, the last game on that list, Washington State is a 10.5-point favorite against Cal. The Cougs are way better than the Golden Bears, and the game is in Pullman, and it's at night. I'm probably going to take Wazoo even if it stays at 10.5, but I'm hoping it drops under 10. So with those 4, since it is different, it's always important to follow us on Twitter. We'll put that link in the description. But this week especially, because as we get closer to kickoff Saturday, I will let y'all know anything I'm thinking and any kind of move I make. But just to review it real fast, those 4 I'm watching is South Carolina at Ole Miss in a pick'em, Texas A&M +4 at Auburn, Alabama as a 14.5-point favorite at LSU, and Washington State as a 10.5-point favorite at home against California in the late night game. But then the 2 that I have locked in for sure, they are Syracuse -4.5 at Wake Forest and Georgia -10 at Kentucky. So it is a little different. Follow us on Twitter at Jackson Bleacher. The link is in the description. And we got also check out jacksonbleachers.com for any kind of update too. We'll keep you updated. But thank you for watching, and let's have a perfect week, make more money.